Hello there, everyone. Welcome to the weekly again. Sorry I couldn't do it last week, but thankfully, Ralph is back in the studio, which is great.
In the London studio.
In the London studio, sorry, yes, indeed. As you can see, the sun is, hold on, up there. The sun is shining on my plant collection up here, and you can see that they haven't grown at all, strangely. But anyway, right.
Which is not to be understood as a disparaging comment on alternative energy. Of
no,
course,
indeed, no, not at all.
Anyway,
right, we are going to talk this week about three things. Firstly, interest rates. Secondly, AI. Thirdly, we're going to be talking about podcasting. So let's start with the subject of the week, which is interest rates. So what do you, any excitement for you, Ralph? Have you been particularly enthused this week about interest rates?
Yes, I found interest rates especially interesting. See what I did there?
Hey, very good.
Yeah.
Of course.
Have you ever wondered?
So they're called interesting rates then, basically.
Yeah, there should be. Yeah. Have you ever wondered why they say Germans don't have a sense of humor?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's why. Anyway, so moving swiftly on. So no, I did find it very interesting. And the markets, actually, the equity markets, clearly also found it very interesting. This time in a positive sense, which is rare and therefore in itself notable and a cause for celebration. The markets went up pretty much everywhere in the US, in the UK. Even the bond markets responded positively, and they responded positively to an event which in itself you might think is still negative, because the Bank of England increased interest rates and so did the Fed, the US central bank. But the US central bank, for one, increased interest rates by less than people were expecting. And also in the US, if you actually look at the history of the last three interest rate increases, you see that it went from 75 bips increase. A bip is a basis point. That's basically 0.1%. So 75 bips increase to 50 bips, and this one is now 25 bips. So two things here. First, the markets were expecting more. And second, now the markets are seeing a decreasing trend of increases, if you're still with me, and projecting that out, the next one is sort of 0%, and the markets can see an end to the negative succession of interest rate increases. And this is also the case in the UK, where the Bank of England has basically said, actually, now I don't know exactly what they said, but the gist of it is that if there is another interest rate hike, there will be one more, and that should then be it. Inflation, the Bank of England said, is probably now at the peak, and so we should really be at the turning point here, and the turning point in the US should be line of sight. So this is all good news. We see inflation, a sustainable, albeit slow, decrease in inflation should be around the corner, and commensurately reduction of interest rates should be happening soon. And of course, we know why that is positive. There's a real world impact which we'll all feel, which is that our mortgage costs are going to come down. And there's a more sort of esoteric impact, which is the fact that earnings in the stock markets are discounted at lower rates of interest, and therefore the value of them goes up. That is also in part contributing to the equity market increase which we've seen. So we have positive news to comment on for once.
No, absolutely, and I mean it does look like the rising interest rates seem to have done the trick. Although there is one thing actually that I have noticed I don't know if you've seen this, but Turkey's Turkey's inflation rate has actually gone down a lot, incredibly. Since the end, because it was whatever it was, 80% going into the end of last year, and now it's only something like 60% So I have to say I haven't really looked at that for a bit, but Does that mean that Erdogan was right all along?
No,
but
no. No,
I mean, I think it'd be other things.
It doesn't mean that. I mean, I don't really know exactly what causes this, but one needs to bear in mind that when inflation rises to these atrocious heights, then it follows that nobody can afford to buy anything anymore. And this is in fact a very real world, commonsensical consequence of this. And as demand in the economy falls away, then eventually you would see this in prices responding. And let's also be clear. I mean, this just means that prices are still 60% higher than they used to be. So, but nevertheless, I mean, it's obviously positive news if you just look at inflation. But if anything, I think the example of Turkey shows that you need to look at inflation in context. Also in the UK, for example, just because that's where we live, it's closest to home. Also, of course, in the UK, the fact that inflation is falling is, of course, in itself positive. And there's no way to cast this as negative news. But it is still embedded in an environment, in an economy, which is not going to grow. So if we look at news flow, which is also saying that there's going to be a recession. I mean, some viewers might say, well, why is that then? Because inflation is coming down and this is positive news. The problem is, of course, that we are living in an economy where the inflation is caused by increasing costs and increasing expenses. And it is fought by interest rate hikes because that's the only weapon you have. And in an environment such as this, yes, the interest rate hikes have reduced inflation. That is positive, but it also means that people are not going out into the economy and buying a lot. That's, of course, the game. That's the goal of it, but it means that we will have low growth. Indeed, in the UK, we have forecast 2 consecutive quarters of contraction, which is the definition for a recession. But even here, the bank is now saying that the recession is going to be shallower and is not going to take as long. So it just as a consequence, therefore, it's good news, but it doesn't mean that the environment is improving generally. The economy is not necessarily improving. We still are going to slide into recession. Europe is going to slide into a period of low growth, although also I think the IMF has said that we are now probably not going to look at the specter of a global recession. So in the end, on balance, it's still all good.
Yeah, exactly. I think that is indeed. So there we go. Quick inflation chat. I mean, obviously, this is the favourite subject of this podcast, isn't it, generally? But now we're going into the other direction, which is good. Okay, next thing is AI. I mean,
cool.
Obviously, like ChatGPT, so OpenAI's ChatGPT has been the topic of conversation for many people for the last few weeks. And we have actually mentioned it before. I mean, obviously, we're a little further on now. And I just think it's an amazing phenomenon. We've got OpenAI talking about providing a paid for service now. I think it's only going to happen in America initially, but it's going to be a $20 a month service. So you'll get access to better, like faster servers and stuff like that. And then it'll be rolled out. But I think, one of the things that a lot of people have been having a lot of fun with it, right? Including your good self. And I've tried to use it, within the Watson's Daily context, but found it lacking. However, I think that this is a moment where a lot of people should look to try to maybe think about what areas is this actually going to affect. And I thought it was interesting what you were saying earlier. We had a bit of a chat before recording this podcast. But that you were saying, and I agreed, was that it's a lot easier to think of the bad things you could do with AI, like getting it to write your homework, and other bits and pieces. But what do you think? What positive things do you think it could do?
Oh boy, yes. Let me maybe start that comment by talking about something related, but not quite the same. You see, I used to be an equity analyst. That's what I always did. When somebody asked me a question, I asked a different one. I answered a different one. No, but look, we've just been watching a program of The West Wing, which many of you guys out there are far too young to know. This was a show which was aired 20 years ago, and I was watching
it. That long ago?
Yeah, pretty much.
Wow.
Started in 1999.
Yeah, doesn't seem like that. Right,
absolutely.
Okay, yeah.
And so I was watching it, and we were watching like 3 episodes or 4, whatever. And I was saying to my wife, "Why are all these people on the show carrying newspapers around? I mean, it's unwieldy. You can't read them. It's just completely ridiculous." And I asked that as a proper question. I meant it. I didn't know why they were doing this. And immediately I checked myself, and I thought, Ralphie, you're not Gen Z. You were not born into a society which uses that technology naturally. And yet, even I had already forgotten a time where paper copies of newspapers were everywhere. Now we are looking at these things on our tablet. And my point is that within the last 20 years, internet-based technologies have changed societies quite severely. And yes, there also you can focus on the negatives, but the positives there are, for example, it's a little bit environmentally friendly if you don't have to print newspapers all the time, if you don't have to print books anymore, newspapers, news, books, literature, etc. It's all at your fingertips and instantly accessible. So to answer your question in the same framework now, I'm wouldn't be surprised if at the end of this decade, we will have witnessed a change of our societies, which is as fundamental as the change we've been gradually experiencing over the last 20 years. And it will be spearheaded and driven by AI. So some of the applications here, for example, if you think about this, are starting perhaps with ChatGPT, just because you mentioned it. Every profession that is based on writing somehow will find it easier and therefore more efficient to do their job. Journalists, etc., can ask the AI to write an article, then they take the article and they top and tail it or change it in ways which they find reasonable and necessary. But they don't really have to think necessarily about giving a structure to something. So that will make it more efficient. Better uses or more interesting uses are any sort of face recognition, voice imprinting software, which is giving rise to technologies now known as deep fake. And deep fake, again, it's not, by the way, a very good term because it highlights the nefarious use rather than the positive use. But for example, in advertising, you can use this very efficiently, again, driving down the cost of producing advertisements. These are I think, low-level acting engagements, let's say an insurance company, where you see happy elderly people tossing a ball to their children whilst talking about the annuity of insurance company X. That's the sort of thing.
I tell you what, I think that the latest Vanguard advert would probably, fit quite well into that, wouldn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
I'm with them. Oh, I'm with Vanguard, and you go, okay, great. Anyway, yeah, sorry.
And an AI could have done that more
easily.
efficiently and more easily. Newscasters, 24-hour news services, where you basically have newscasters who do not really need to be there in reality, in person anymore.
No, because that's the thing. When you said this earlier, I did think that is such a good example because, you do get. I mean, there are these really annoying programs. Actually, there's one that's on specifically on this on a Saturday morning at 7:50 on BBC. I forgot what it's called, but it is the most annoying. As soon as I see it, I switch over and do something else, because it's always people saying, why did you use this? Why did you cover this so much in the news? And it's not really news, and blah, blah, blah. And, you just, or they'll complain that someone's being unprofessional because they reacted too much to a news item or something like that. These kinds of things, you won't have them if you have an AI, person on the, in the studio, whatever, reading the news out, because they won't have any, not any real emotions. So I thought that was really interesting what you said about that and how that could,
Indeed. It's sort of, while we're talking about this now, I think, again, you can't quite divorce it from the potentially risky aspects of these activities. And I would wonder, or I'm wondering whether, if technologies, or when technologies of this kind are becoming more widespread, you will see maybe a logo appearing on your television, AI created, or maybe the advertisement company has to actually add that as AI created, like a sticker, just like it would say on foodstuffs whether they are genetically engineered, etc. You see, but that's just a. You see, that's how I would say a healthy development of this technology can happen. It's not as if the consumer is going to feel duped by this.
Yeah.
And look at...
Yeah, I was going to say, I've just got to say this before I forget, is that I think that there will be a really huge resistance to this, especially in anything to do with the media and everything. And, I was saying in, I think, today's Watson's Daily that, there's already people very worried about it. But for instance, I'll give you a good example of this, right? So, this is this is a while ago now. This is probably about 10 or so years ago now. I decided to do a bit of stand-up comedy, right, as a hobby.
I remember that.
And what was really interesting, look, I only did like 10 gigs, right, which is nothing, right? It's nothing. But so anyway, so did 10 gigs, and I remember there was one gig I was at, and there were these guys who were also on the lineup that particular night, and it's really funny because I think there were four of them, and they were quite well known on the circuit, right, on the amateur circuit. But then, I started noticing them on TV. Separate ones. There was one, doing. I think one of them did Purple Bricks, another one did, and they all did these, breakfast cereals and all that kind of thing. And I have to say, I think that if they did do what you were saying in adverts, you are going to cut off a whole load of people, because, if you are, let's say, I'm just saying this because it just comes to mind from what you were saying, right? I mean, if you are a jobbing comedian, so yeah, you start off, you get your, as they call it, a tight 5, and then you get a tight 10. Then you start getting, you may get sort of paid gigs, start getting small paid gigs. By the way, my record for me getting paid, I got paid once 20 quid for my set, which was 5 minutes long, a pint of beer and a curry, which I think, actually, if you scaled that up, that's actually quite a lot of money, right? So anyway, but that was the height of what I got. But anyway,
this is also still more than I receive on this show.
Well, sorry.
Carry on.
So, anyway, so the thing is that, you'll get these paid gigs here and there, and it's okay, and you might try to take your show to Edinburgh. I mean, this is usually the holy grail, right? You do your stuff. All the comedians, they do their, they start saying, oh, I'm going to do an Edinburgh show. So they then start putting their material together nowish, and they try it in different venues and different audiences and things like that. They really try to tighten up their act. And so by the time it comes to going to Edinburgh, It's all tight.
Yeah.
You've got good gags. The pace is right. All that kind of stuff. Anyway, to do that requires money. And actually, a lot of these, I'm still on these, these groups for the comedy stuff, because I would kind of like to have a go at it again. But the thing is that I think, that costs money to put a gig on at Edinburgh. It costs a lot of money. You've got to do flyers. You've got to stay there. I mean, to stay there is, you see all these messages saying, hey, has anyone got anywhere, a floor space, or can I, rent a cupboard or something like that? All of these things you have to have money for. And a lot of these people will, they use things like these kind of serial adverts, adverts for estate agents and stuff, because they pay really well. And it's that they can help them go forward and continue with their career, so that they do end up on things like, on panel shows and all that kind of thing.
Yeah, I believe absolutely. I mean, to the extent that the advertisement, the creation of the advertisement, if it's even if it's a paper-based flyer, that can be very effectively done by AI.
Yeah,
you just ask an AI sort of chat stroke design platform to do this for you, and it will come out and will be more interesting and creative than just simply using a template from the internet. And so yes, that's a way, absolutely. And then also perhaps moving on from there, we all have seen, at least the news, that there is this new ABBA concert.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah,
absolutely astonishing. It's over here in London. They in East London, they purpose-built a new stadium to house all the requisite technology which is required to make this work. But and my wife went to see the show, and she said absolutely astounding. I mean, it's basically indistinguishable from these people when they were alive.
Well, they are still alive, but yeah.
When they were, good point.
At their peak.
When they were alive and touring.
so yeah, that's right. We don't want any messages saying anything like, oh, what's going on? But anyway, yeah, carry on.
Well, this is exactly why I should appear on this show as an avatar and an AI, because these type of embarrassing things just wouldn't happen. Yeah. So anyway, and of course, this opens up potentially a whole new sector in entertainment. You can bring the Beatles back. You can bring Elvis back, who I believe is dead, and other things. Frank Sinatra, you name it. I mean, the world it's brilliant. So that's a possibility. Then there are other things which are currently being discussed, let's say, and this is quite interesting because it depends on your attitude whether you think this is an ethical product or perhaps not so much. Suppose a loved one in your family dies. Let's make it real. Let's say this is my wife or somebody's husband, etc. There is a possibility I could, for example, sort of, let's say, digitally clone my wife, do a voice imprint, do various videos, and these would be transformed into something similar to the avatars which we see in the ABBA concert currently.
That's amazing.
It would live on my hard disk, and I would, and the ChatGTP type enabled AI platform would allow me to have a conversation with that representation. And just as you can have chats with ChatGTP, which feel very natural, I would be able to have a conversation with my wife after her death. Now, the question is, of course, it depends on your attitude, on the user's attitude, so to speak, whether you think that is a desirable development, a desirable product, or perhaps not. The positive aspect of it is clear. It will help you get over the death of a loved one. But then the negative aspect is also clear. It might lead to an unhealthy fixation on a person who is dead and will precisely engineer the opposite, which means that you are not going to have psychological closure. So I don't know where the development is going to go, and I'm going to sit on the fence on this one. I'm just going to highlight the possibility that this is highlight the technological possibility of this. And so for all you guys out there who are science fiction fans, we've all seen things from Neil Stephenson and Alastair Reynolds who are basically bringing to life transhuman societies where consciousness uploads into PCs are possible. Of course, that's not going to be around the corner. Maybe that's never possible. But it's that sort of thing which we appear to be getting a glimpse of now. And so these are just some of the positive aspects.
Isn't it amazing? I mean, I think it's incredible we're talking about even the possibility. I mean, it's almost a bit like, what is it? Is it cryogenic? You know, when people said that they're like freezing.
Cryogenic freezing,
yeah. Because it'd be like a not quite as good version, in a way, of cryogenic. The thing is with cryogenic, you don't know whether you're going to be defrosted okay, but assuming you are, and they put you in the microwave for the right amount of time, ding, already, pizza's ready now. Hold on a minute. Let's get him out. Or going out like this. But you know, assuming that they get the defrosting setting correct. You know, I mean, obviously, that is you. That is actually you. Whereas, of course,
we speak to our technology expert, Peter.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, I you know, with this particular thing, it's not the same because it's not actually the person, but it's kind of.
Well, it's a virtual. It's a virtual representation of a person, and we can actually, if you look at some of the sort of quite creepy, deep fake videos which are available on the internet, Tom Cruise, for example. Well, everybody can spot, that's not quite Tom Cruise, but you know, it's also not far away from Tom Cruise, and so these developments are certainly. Are certainly out there. Just another thing which I would like to say. On the one hand, it is tantalizing what these technologies can actually bring to society. Just at the moment, we should also be careful of not believing the hype which goes with it.
That's true. Yeah.
Because ChatGPT, for example, is a very capable program, and it produces texts which are, I would say, at the level of an intelligent 14-year-old. But they are not better than that. So if you wanted to actually produce a bachelor thesis, better write it yourself. Otherwise, it comes out quite a pedestrian piece of research. Also, if you're asking ChatGPT to calculate anything, you better not, because it doesn't do it right. And finally, if you put in things which are questions that require mathematical logical reasoning, you'd see that ChatGPT is really nowhere. But also in saying that, I don't want you guys to think that I'm a Luddite, that I don't like this technology. Quite the opposite. I'm a huge fan, and I see the opportunities for society very much highlighted here. It is just that, interestingly, my benchmark has moved from sort of what I can expect a machine to do to what would I expect a machine to be able to do if it was as good as a human. So the benchmark has shifted. That's how good this technology already is.
Amazing. Anyway, let's
can I just one anecdote on ChatGPT? I'm so sorry, guys. This is going to be funny. I hope. It has a slightly chauvinistic ring to this particular story. So if you can bring yourself to not dial into this, it's a funny story. It's a dialogue, a short dialogue with ChatGPT, which somebody did, and it goes a bit like this: ChatGPT, please tell me what's 2 + 5, and the response was correctly, it's 7. The next line was, my wife says it's 8. And ChatGPT, being very apologetic, but also very polite, was saying, I apologize, but this is not correct. Perhaps your wife has not had access to the right sources of information, etc. And the respondent said, my wife is always right. And ChatGPT responded, well, in that case, I apologize. If your wife says it's 8, it's 8. Now, like I said before, it has a slightly chauvinistic ring to it, but that's not what I want to focus on. It is an innocuous and innocent story, which I think does highlight that ChatGPT is not quite the genuine article yet, but it is also very amusing to find that it is it cannot. I mean, it's almost it can be a surprisingly rich experience to talk to this AI. Try it out, guys.
Interesting. Right. So let's go on to the final topic for today, which is, I mean, we've talked about this a little bit before, but so there was an interesting article in the Telegraph, and it was all about how Spotify's had a bit of a clear out of senior staff, in particular someone called Dawn Ostroff, who was responsible for basically shelling out loads of money to buy in Joe Rogan, his podcast, the Sussexes, and a few others. I mean, I think I said in a previous podcast that, anyone can build something. Oh, and I think the Obamas as well. So, but anyone can build something up with that if they got a blank checkbook. But I think that it's a good thing that Spotify's maybe had a look at it and thought, hold on, this is quite a lot of money here, and actually, is that really in terms of acquisition, sort of user acquisition cost, is it all that good? And I would say that it probably isn't. I don't think they need to pay this kind of thing, because actually I think a lot of people that do, I mean, this is quite ironic here, me talking about this, but a lot of people who do podcasts are doing it for exposure for something else. I mean, I would say myself that this all came from basically my wife and everyone sort of getting on my case and saying, you should do a podcast, Watson's Daily. And I thought, okay, well, I wanted to do it to show people what it's like to have a commercial awareness conversation sounds like, because not everyone will be sitting around the dinner table with their family talking about business news and world affairs, right? So, I mean, so I thought this would be a good thing to do, but it also has the nice side benefit of hopefully people listen to this and they think, actually, this is quite useful information. What is this Watson's Daily? They look at it, think, yes, that's good, and then maybe they subscribe. So, I mean, yes, it does, but other people are very much more blatant about it. I mean, I've just been blatant about it there, but generally speaking, I'm not blatant about it. But yeah, these people, and so do you really need to pay them that much money? And actually, as it is, if you're paying that much money, from Joe Rogan's point of view, for instance, presumably your listener numbers go down because you've gone on. Not everyone has both platforms. People have to plump for one or the other, and so you lose. As in terms of overall audience, you lose people. But then again, he doesn't care because you've got $200 million, for instance. So I don't know. I thought it was really interesting. I think that podcasts are still very popular. I think that they got popular under lockdown. I suspect that it's one of those things that actually happened in lockdown and people actually realized they quite like podcasts. And so it's one of those rare things that happened under lockdown and is continuing.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think that too. It's a pandemic type product, isn't it? I mean, this is not well, I'm going to start again. This is easily misunderstood. I don't think a podcast is only interesting in the pandemic, but because in a pandemic we have a lot of time on our hands, obviously we will be able to dial into more things and consume more content in this way. So I think that perhaps these crazy sums of money which Spotify paid for some content are not going to be sustainable. And that is the news which we're seeing here, that Spotify has stopped paying these exorbitantly high sums of money for the acquisition of podcasts. We are not seeing news that podcasts are necessarily reducing in demand. However, that must also be the case because the world has started to be more fast-lived again. In the US, we have now 50% more people coming back to the office than before. We see this trend accelerating in the UK. People's lives are just heating up again and they're becoming more busy. And so to me, that sort of means that you can listen to a podcast probably on your way to work.
That's right.
So if you, for example, do the commute into London, which may take you 45 minutes or perhaps even an hour, then you have time to listen to something at a stretch, perhaps for 30 minutes or so. And that's the sort of length of a podcast, which I think usably is going to sell in the future. But even so, you need to actually opt for one thing. I mean, you can either listen to Joe Rogan or to Sean Carroll, who is a theoretical physicist. That's the sort of thing I never listen to. I mean, it's just I don't listen to this kind of stuff. And anyway, so you can only do that. And so, yeah, I think it just highlights that the range of products which are on offer, podcasts, shorts on TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, is as iridescent in its variety as it has become during the pandemic. But the demand for these is coming down simply because people don't have as much time on their hands now and do not have as much time to devote themselves to any one of these platforms with similar sort of dedication. And so that's I think what we're seeing here. I don't believe that is a sign that podcasts in themselves as a medium are losing in attractiveness. No. What do you think?
No, I don't think so. I mean, it seems. I mean, you know, we're very fortunate and get decent numbers. And you know, I was thinking in a way. I don't know. I mean, I kind of think from a like creator point of view, I reckon if Spotify say put that, let's say 400 million, right? Instead of paying 200 for Joe Rogan and a few hundred here and there, why don't they use that to pay the creators, which will keep them on? You know, it will keep the numbers going. You don't have to pay for one podcast. Although, of course, as I keep saying from time to time, you know, if you know, Daniel Ek wants to come along and you know, say, look, Peter, I mean, here's 100 million if you want, you know, I certainly wouldn't kick him out. But, you know, but I mean, I do think you don't need to do that. I think that if Spotify uses more users, they can have this kind of, you know, YouTube type system, or maybe if they do that, you know, to make it better, or from a creator's point of view, provide more analytics. I mean, I put this out on, I use Anchor, and Anchor is owned by Spotify, and their statistics, their kind of breakdowns and stuff are really started off very basic. They've definitely improved. But for instance, I think if you had a platform, you could make better analytics. You could do more things. There are various different ways you can make money and attract creators rather than just go, you know, pick 5 and then pay them a massive amount of money. So I don't know whether they'll do that instead of going for the big names. I don't know.
Yeah, we will have to see. I mean, it's obviously the case that streaming platforms are scrambling for content, and are scrambling for subscribers. I believe there's a certain saturation point which has been reached. But then also it's actually simplistic and probably wrong to compare all of these platforms in the way which I myself have just done. I mean, I was just basically saying TikTok, YouTube, etc. I mean, these offer different things to different people, and it is well possible that I look at a few shorts on TikTok or Insta, and then go on to the person's YouTube channel to check out what else there is. And if I end up at your YouTube channel, for example, I might then check out your product, your written product. And that's how the ecosystem of products work on the internet. It is just still interesting to me to see that Spotify has stopped paying these amounts of money. To be honest with you, what we might see in that news is perhaps nothing more than the fact that the pandemic hyped up demand so much that these peak royalty sums were being paid. And possibly we're just seeing that Joe Rogan coined it basically, and he wouldn't have received peak amounts of that nature had times been normal. We were just basically seeing that the froth in the market is being taken off here.
Do you know, I just had a thought, right? And I know that's dangerous. But what about if they used money instead of buying a single podcast or something, is they could monitor all the podcasts and they could see which ones were successful. And they could almost have, like in a record company, you have A&R people and they go out and go out and they go to live venues, they see new groups, then they sign them up. Why wouldn't that be quite good? Like if you were Spotify and you had like an agency within Spotify that then, sort out decent podcasts, and then you then approach them and say, look, we'd like to sign you up, and then we will push your content. We're going to do this, we're going to do that. Then they would get much better return because they would be able to push the podcast that they like, and then like it'd be almost like I say, like a record deal. You sign up, they then push you. And hopefully, with their help and their professional, whatever, they manage to boom, get the numbers going. You can then get more adverts. Then they take a cut of the adverts. I don't know. It might be a thing, maybe. I don't know.
You mean like podcasting scouts?
Yeah.
But is that not what Spotify was doing by signing up?
I'd say that I would say that would be like maybe like a recording equivalent of maybe wandering up to Ed Sheeran after a concert and going, "Hey, would you like to do exclusive with us?" And then going, "Here's an absolute shed load of money," and then he signs up, rather than you being the person going to the dingy nightclub, the pub, the back room at the pub, and seeing someone who you think has got talent. Do you see what I mean? That's that's the analogy I would make on that front. So that what they've done is that, like I say, they've approached Ed Sheeran, for instance, the Ed Sheeran podcasting equivalent, and they've gone straight in. Whereas actually, surely they would see more return if they went to the equivalent of the back room at the local pub and seen the local act and gone, actually, I think they're quite good. Let's develop them.
Oh, I see. Right. Okay, I understand what you mean. Well, so, yeah. I haven't actually seen any development of that nature.
No, I've not either. I just had the idea as I was talking to you. Maybe we should. Maybe it's a Dragon's Den idea. Yeah. We should set it up. We should be the the Spotify podcast talent agency or something.
Yeah, fantastic. The podcast scouts.
Yeah, there we go.
I'll let you present this to Dragon's Den first, and I'll see how far I get.
Yeah, we'll see. But anyway, I think we'll have to end it there. But
Cool.
look, it's been fascinating as always to have a chat about some of the interesting themes that have come up this week. But anyway, yeah,
Fantastic.
Great to talk to you as usual. We'll just end it there. So thank you very much for everyone for listening.
Thanks, guys. Always a pleasure being here. Lovely. See you next week.
Yeah. Bye.
Bye.